You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented, as always, by Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me is my co-host, my partner in crime. He's your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, should we just bite the bullet, just go ahead and vault Chad Kelly into the Ring of Fame already?
Yeah, he can join his rightful place next to Kyle Sloter in there. So, yeah. Definitely.
Looks like Kyle got the last laugh. We're going to get to that here in just a little bit.
Yeah, I still don't understand why I let him go, but we're going to definitely touch on that. A lot to talk about tonight.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just a couple of points of business real quick before we dive into the Broncos stuff. You got to follow the show on social media. On Twitter, it's Huddle Up Pod, at Huddle Up Pod. On Facebook, you guys, we've got 2 Facebook pages, Denver Broncos on 24/7 Sports, the same old Mile High Huddle Facebook page. Also, if you haven't done this, take some time, leave a creative review as far as this show goes, wherever you're listening. I don't care if it's iTunes, Stitcher, iHeart, YouTube, Google Play, Spreaker, wherever you're listening to the show, take some time, leave us a creative review. Hopefully it's positive, but if it's not, that's okay. We can take it. We want to know what you think about the show. We love the engagement and the feedback. So it also helps us out tremendously in terms of growing the show, reaching new listeners, especially on platforms like iTunes. So help us out there. And we also got to say thank you to our sponsor of tonight's show, Audible. You guys get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. Over 180,000 different titles to choose from, whether you're on iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. audibletrial.com/huddleup. It's great for those who really enjoy reading but don't always have the time to sit down and turn the pages on the books that you want to read, because you can get them under your belt, though, these books, while you're doing other things. Multitask, right? Commutes, the gym, the kitchen, whatever you're doing, you can listen to these great books while you're doing other things. So we say thank you to Audible for sponsoring tonight's show. Go to audibletrial.com/huddleup. All right, so the Denver Broncos took the field Saturday night at the newly minted Broncos Stadium at Mile High. The preseason opener, falling to the Minnesota Vikings, ultimately 42-28. Now, the first half of this game, extremely difficult to watch in a lot of ways. I mean, I loved it because I like watching individual players more than really following the ball, especially during the preseason. During the regular season, you kind of follow the ball, and then you take time maybe afterwards to go study film or whatever. But during the preseason, I just pick a player, I follow him, and it's a little bit more interesting that way. But it was rough going early on, especially. And the first teamers, Zach, I mean, they did little to assuage the concerns in Broncos country that Vance Joseph is, in fact, a lame duck, and that 2018 is just going to be more of the same from this team. And while I won't go so far as to say the Broncos looked unprepared, the first teamers, because we got to remember they didn't game plan for this, I will say that the Broncos didn't quite look ready for that real game intensity. You know, like where it just goes up a couple notches. It didn't feel like the Broncos were maybe quite ready for that or anticipated that. I don't know. But the Vikings were blowing the Broncos off the ball on both sides of the ball. And Case Keenum's unit in his debut was marred by a false start on Jared Veldheer and then a miscue later on by the veteran Emmanuel Sanders, who kind of seemed to be on the wrong page with Keenum play-wise. Thought maybe it was a run, it was a pass. And then you look at Keenum's box score, of course, 2 possessions, threw the ball 4 times, completed 1 to Demaryius Thomas, and then the Broncos offense went 3 and out both times before they were yanked by the coaches. So we're going to get to the defense next. We'll talk about them on their own. But what were your immediate takeaways, Zach, from the starting offense on Saturday night?
I watched the first drive. They went 3 and out, and it was ruined by a penalty. I felt right at home, mid-season form. You won't go so far as to say that they looked unprepared, but I will, and that falls on Vance Joseph, who didn't have his team ready for a preseason game. I put it on Twitter that the last time he coached a game, the Senior Bowl, they were blown out, and they fell behind 14-0 last night. It always stems from the coach. The crap rolls from the top to the bottom. So it really is a reflection of him, and he preached that in training camp. He wanted his his players to start practicing faster and showing more intensity, they just don't buy in. And it's preseason. I know that, I don't want to overreact to that, right. But they were not ready to play in that game. And the offense, I wasn't expecting them to look like the 2000 Rams just yet. Keenum and a lot of new moving parts there, but you wanted more than 2 3-and-outs and a couple yards on offense. No running game, no creative passing. The offense was probably vanilla by design. You don't want to show your hand in the preseason, but it was definitely not encouraging considering the way they talked up Case Keenum. They talked up these wide receivers, these running backs, this new look offensive line. I'm willing to give the offense a pass, but I'm not going to give the coaching a pass because now in his second year, he's showing the same negative traits as you saw last year, and it all comes down to coaching in the NFL. I've said it multiple times on this podcast, and it's true. It's a reflection of Vance Joseph, so it's not a good start for his second season.
They definitely came out flat. Just from an energy level, the Vikings they just out-physicaled them. They were the more intense team, and I'll agree with you that you can lay that at the feet of the coaching staff and most specifically Vance Joseph. So you got to believe that within the context of it being the preseason, the front office isn't overreacting exactly, but I would be shocked if during one of these conversations from on high, something to the effect of, we got to start better, we got to have more intensity, we got to have more energy, that wasn't a great start, Vance. Something like that has been communicated to him because they just got to bring it more. It was discouraging, and I don't think it was necessarily the right decision. I know it's preseason. I mean, it's an exhibition game, right? Like, you don't want to risk your star players and your starters unnecessarily, but there's also a little bit more to it as far as chemistry, as far as some of the psychology that goes into these players. And Case Keenum, I mean, this is a big opportunity for him, being the guy, unquestioned starter, gets paid, and his debut, he goes 3-and-out twice, and I understand how the coaches, they want to pump the brakes, they don't want to risk him unnecessarily, but I think because of how badly the first 2 series went, they should have given him one more to come back and try and find a groove, just so that he felt a little bit of confidence. Not that he necessarily needs that, because we understand, he's in his 6th year and all. We get that. He's been down the road a few times. But I think considering that this is very much a new situation, Zach, it would have been good to allow Keenum and the first team to come back out one more time. And if they go 3-and-out, all right, pull the plug. We gave you 3 chances.
I 1,000% agree with you. And he gave a sideline interview yesterday with 9 News, and he was a little peeved about that. Yeah, he was a little bit, and I don't blame him. Why not give him a 3rd series? And in his post-game presser, he said he always wants to play, but he respects coach's decisions. So there might be a little disconnect brewing there. I don't want to, become the National Enquirer of Broncos news, but I'm not going to start any rumors. I just think he wanted to get out there, and I don't blame him. Also, to that point about chemistry, why hold out Ronald Leary? Why not get that starting 5 gelled together? He had a little knee soreness, but give him a series just to get that starting 5 together and let them bond. That's the most important thing you can do with so many new moving parts, with Garrett Bowles on the left side and Valdir on the right side. I was a little surprised at that. Yep. And they kept out a couple players on defense too. So chemistry, it was not a very well-oiled machine last night, and you just wanted to see more.
Right, and hopefully they'll get a little bit more of an opportunity to lay some roots down in the second game, but really we probably shouldn't expect to see a whole heck of a lot from Case Keenum in terms of snaps until the 3rd game, which is traditionally anyway the dress rehearsal where the offense, the starters I should say, usually start and go through the first half and the opening series of the 3rd quarter. So we might have to wait that long to really kind of get a beat on Case Keenum, but who knows, maybe this coming week against the Chicago Bears we'll get a little bit more of a taste for what he can do. But we look at the defense. You mentioned it, no Von Miller. We saw Bradley Chubb. That was his debut as a Bronco. There was a couple plays that I really liked, including one of him on the goal line helping make a run stop. But he also looked a little bit lost. I mean, the Vikings right out of the gates gashed the Broncos on the ground. One of those plays was at the expense of Bradley Chubb. And so, you expect that from a rookie. I don't care if you're Von Miller in 2011 or Bradley Chubb. It's going to take you a little time to get up to speed. And then you look at Bradley Roby. I wasn't too excited by the fact that he got beaten by Diggs and Cousins on that one route, that deeper route down the right
Just a great catch, though.
Yeah.
Great throw.
It was, and it's one of those things where it's like, look, how do you stop that? It was just such a perfect throw, and Diggs threw out his arms just right at perfect time to just snatch and pluck the ball out of the air. But Roby got beat there, not an auspicious start. And then, the first teamers with a little sprinkling, peppering in of second teamers basically allowed 2 touchdowns. So we're going to dive more, obviously, into the topic of how serious was last night's lack of execution in the grand scheme of things. We'll get to that later in the show. But it was certainly, talk about discouraging with the offense. I don't think it was any more encouraging for the Broncos defense, Zach.
Let me harp on Vance for just one more second here. He said a couple days ago that Vaughn would play in this game, and he's healthy and ready to go. And then Vaughn was warming up, and then he was informed that he wasn't playing. I don't understand how that happens. But Bradley Chubb did not have the best debut. He failed to set the edge a few times, and he was kind of blown off the ball in the running game. It's to be expected. He's more of a pass rusher than an overall outside linebacker. Keep in mind, he's converting to OLB from defensive end in college. Big transition. Hopefully DeMarcus Ware can give him a few pointers there. I was also not impressed with Shane Ray in run support either. He kind of got washed out of the play.
Yeah.
That's kind of been his strength, his run support. So I was a little surprised about that. And Brandon Marshall missed a tackle. I was really surprised the Broncos' run defense was so leaky. They were 4th in the NFL last year. How did they just went right down the field, Minnesota, with no Dalvin Cook in the game.
Yep.
The secondary, they didn't have Stuart Cravens. They didn't have Tremaine Brock. They were down a couple players there, so I'm going to give him a pass. Yeah. Roby, he was picked on a little bit, but Isaac Yiadom, that was the more glaring deficiency because he was picked on relentlessly. And he is a rookie, but why would you put a rookie on the Vikings' best receiver, Stephon Diggs, one-on-one with no help? Again, it's coaching. So I was not pleased about the no-fly zone. I was not pleased about the ground control run defense. It wasn't the greatest audition for this, this still vaunted Denver defense, but execution, coaching, scheme.
It just feels like the Broncos on a coaching level should have, considering what kind of a season they're coming off of, taken this first preseason game maybe a little bit more seriously.
Agree.
It kind of just feels like, this is just me talking here, but it kind of feels like more of the message that was being handed down during team meetings leading up to this game this past week was more a, hey guys, let's just remember this is the preseason. That was kind of the message to the veterans. And then kind of mixed in with that on the back end is, and for you young guys, let's not forget this is a big opportunity. This is your chance to, stake your claim, build your NFL resume. So it's kind of a mixed signal what you're sending to the team overall. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know that. That's just kind of the feeling, reading between the lines, seeing how this team performed. But before we get to the second team, we got to talk about at least one of the bright spots from Saturday night, and that's special teams, because Tom McMahon, if the early returns are any indication, was just what the doctor ordered in Denver, because you got Marquette King. That was just a great free agent signing. The Broncos capitalized on the opportunity there, but he was booming punts. We saw Isaiah McKenzie finally flash with that 78-yard punt return. And he handled multiple punts, did not put the ball on the ground. And you got to love, Zach, that when he actually had the opportunity and some space to return, we got to see some of that wiggle, that phenomenal burst, the speed. So super encouraging from the third phase, Zach, from McKenzie and everybody else. But I just think, too, man, if you think about McKenzie, that was from just the depths that he's had to overcome psychologically from last year. That was a badly needed ego boost. I just hope it doesn't go to his head, because he was kind of a little over cocky last year, and I hope this doesn't, bring him back up to that same level where he's not really taking his situation as seriously as he might need to.
Give Tom McMahon a 10-year extension right this second. McKenzie couldn't even hold on to the ball last year, literally couldn't hold on to the ball. And in his first game with this new coordinator, he runs a long punt return back for a touchdown. And I'm happy for him. I'm happy for the kid. It was a mental failure last year. He has all the physical talent, but the coaching staff put him in a position over and over and over when you can tell he was mentally struggling there. So I was happy to see McKenzie, and what we saw last night was what he brings to the table. That's what he did in Georgia. That's why he was a 5th-round draft pick. It's what the Broncos envisioned as sort of a poor man's version of Tyreek Hill or Dante Hall. That super explosive, super athletic, super quick punt returner. And he made a nice move there. But he gave a lot of credit to Tom McMahon for changing his game and changing his style and helping him. And that's what a veteran coordinator does. Yep. And that's what they missed last year with Brock Olivo, a rookie coordinator. I hated that hire from day one. And I love the McMahon hire from day one. So it's already paying good dividends. And Marquette King, like you said, already has better hang time, better distance, better overall net average than Raleigh Dixon. So that was a nice pickup for them. This specials, if they can just improve slightly or even moderately from last season, which is not saying much, it's going to give the entire team a boost. And from what we see last night and what we saw, they're definitely off to a good start.
Coaching can have such a huge impact on individual players. I mean, it's when you talk about coaching as it relates to Isaiah McKenzie, for example, it's not only technique in terms of here's how you should be catching the ball, here's how you should be tracking the ball in the air, here's what your first thought should be once you secure the ball. Like all that stuff is coaching, but then also cultivating the right mindset in your pupils, if you will, in terms of knowing what a guy like McKenzie, who's super talented, but kind of, the ego was down. You had to wonder what he possessed between the ears, decision making and all that, and then building a person back up like that from the ground, so to speak, is a tall task. And so the early returns are great. We got to see Isaiah McKenzie string a few preseason games together that are like that. He doesn't have to return a 78-yard punt in every game, but just continue to secure the ball, continue to make good decisions if you do return it, and all that. So definitely encouraging. And Marquette King, what are you going to say? I mean, the dude is just, his leg is tremendous. So
let me just say one more thing about the specials. I noticed also, I don't know if you did, but the punt coverage was night and day from last season. They were flying down the field, making open field tackles. So McMahon, I'm very impressed with him. I just wanted to add that point.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, like you said, that the special teams doesn't have to take a massive leap forward in order for this team to really improve overall. But fans realized last season how quickly a season can go just down the tubes when the third phase is not working in harmony with the other two. And especially what really put the Broncos behind the 8 ball last year were all the turnovers on special teams. And you can lay a lot of that at McKenzie's feet, but overall, it was just a slop fest. They always lost. They consistently, I should say, lost the field position battle. And you stack that on top of turnovers, it's just a bad recipe.
Yeah, I gave Joseph a lot of credit for hiring McMahon, and I give him more now. They just needed a veteran coordinator at that spot, and they couldn't have got a better guy coming over from the Colts.
Absolutely. Now, when the second team took the field, we were all wondering how Paxton Lynch was going to respond to his third season. He'd been inconsistent in camp. We've been talking about it the last few weeks. He'd shown some flashes, but you had to wonder if in the game he was going to be able to turn it on. Unfortunately, he was absolutely abysmal. He looked completely inept. He was missing open receivers. He was holding on to the ball too long. His stat line, when he walked off the field, he went 6 for 11. He had 24 yards passing, and he threw that pick. Now, I will say that pick wasn't entirely his fault, but partly it was because even though he was under pressure, he threw that ball with a lot of mustard on it into a really crowded situation, and Austin Traylor, he should have caught it, but it was a questionable decision on the part of Paxton Lynch. But then you go beyond Lynch, you got Royce Freeman, looked like a boss, broke the ice for the Broncos from 23 yards out, just rumbling, breaking tackles, run between the tackles, and then he bounces it outside. So you got to be excited about Royce Freeman. And then another guy I'll say in the second team that really stood out to me, especially on my second viewing when I was watching the tape, was the 6th-round rookie Sam Jones, who was playing center for the second team. So listed as the number 2 center on the depth chart behind Matt Paradis. Of course, he's going to be the center in the game. He played really well. There was a couple plays in particular that I know he wanted back, including one in which he got blown up by the nose tackle on a 3rd and short. However, where D'Angelo Henderson came up about 6 inches short from the first down, if you guys remember that. But other than that, this guy was physical. nasty. He was getting to the second level and run blocking. He was finishing his blocks, and there was also a couple times where he really impressed me picking up the blitz. So just off that first game and reading between the lines on some of the things the coaches have said, I have a hard time seeing Sam Jones not make the 53-man roster. So just getting back to the overall second team, though, Zach, you don't want to go too far out on a limb, but I would say that Lynch's performance, it's getting to the point where it's an embarrassment to the franchise. Okay, and you talked about, when we made the joke at the beginning of the show, and we need to put Chad Kelly in the Ring of Fame, and you said right next to Kyle Sloter. You think about how Paxton Lynch, his influence has trickled down overall on the quarterback situation in Denver. John Elway lets, first of all, Trevor Siemian is allowed to win the job because of Lynch's ineptitude. Then he lets a guy like Kyle Sloter walk. I mean, so many things, the way it's trickled downhill, have impacted this franchise at the quarterback level so negatively, and you can lay that at the feet of Paxton Lynch. But at this point, John Elway's got to be furious. He's got to take some accountability for this situation. How can this front office, Zach, be under any further illusions? It's time to make a change, I think.
It's his ego. It's the only thing, and I've said it multiple times. If Lynch was a fifth-round pick, he would not be on the team. He is inept, and he is completely lost. And to that point about the interception, Vance rode Chad Kelly for that turnover, and he didn't say anything about Lynch's pick. And he did throw that ball too hard at Traylor, so it was kind of at his feet. I'm not a Lynch supporter. I don't hide my bias in that sense, but he's just not showing any progression whatsoever.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any mental awareness. Any grasp of the rush in the pocket. He can't go through his progressions. He just stands there like a deer in the headlights. And it falls at Elway's feet. And keep in mind that Elway let Sloter go to sign Brock Osweiler. So his quarterback decisions have not been great. And it's time he starts feeling some heat because he did trade up for him as a first-round pick. And they have stood by him. But they've tilted this whole competition in Lynch's favor. And Lynch still can't do anything.
Yep.
He's getting shown up again for the third year in a row by a seventh-round pick. And this seventh-round pick was the last pick in the draft.
Yep.
So it's not getting better. It's only getting worse. And if a first-round pick in his third season, which is a make-or-break season usually for quarterbacks, if you can't come in the game in the second, third quarter of a preseason game and move the ball, that's really troubling.
It is. And like you said, it's one thing to not have shown really any progress. It's another thing to actually show regression in your third year. I mean, at least we can say when he was a rookie in the preseason, he had that. There was at least an air of confidence about him, and as he approached the preseason, hitting the field, the confidence of saying, look, I'm a first-round pick. I belong here. He doesn't have that anymore. Like, he's a deer in the headlights. And then we'll talk about Chad Kelly's going to get his own time here in the sun in just a few minutes. But once Chad Kelly hit the field and immediately drives the team down, scores, anytime it showed Paxton Lynch on the sideline, you could see him, the wheels turning in his mind. Just he can see the writing on the wall. I mean, it's especially when you put his performance in contrast to Chad Kelly's. I mean, it really just isn't good. And it's to a point where, what is he doing? I know you can have 90 guys on the roster at this point, but each guy on the roster should be serving some kind of purpose to the overall big picture, or at least the long-term picture. At this point, there can be no further illusions, Zach. I mean, this guy is a complete and utter bust. A bust. And in April, you know what? He might have had a little bit of, this past spring, he might have had a little bit of trade value. But I would be shocked if there's any team in the NFL right now, including the Dallas Cowboys, who would be willing to give up anything in order to acquire Paxton Lynch.
Why would you? He's a lemon. He's shown absolutely nothing. And he's done mentally. He's checked out. And you saw him crying on the bench last year in Oakland. He never had that moxie, that alpha mentality, like you like to say, like Chad Kelly has. And that's why the offense rallies around him when he comes in the game. Paxton shows nothing, and his teammates feed off his energy, and it's non-existent. He's just done mentally. He needs to change his scenery. It's not going to happen in Denver. Elway has to swallow his pride, bite the bullet, and move on already.
Yep. And look, the bright side for John Elway is, look, it's not all bad. I mean, one of the quarterbacks you've drafted in recent years has some potential, and we're going to get to him here in just a few minutes. But, yeah, it's time. It's time. I mean, you don't want to go too overboard on an opening preseason game, but it was just that bad from Paxton Lynch. So we move to the second-team defense, who I think fared a little bit better than the ones, but not by a whole heck of a lot, because you saw them give up their fair share of big plays and points as well. But a few guys that stood out to me. Will Parks, I thought, played extremely well. Marcus Rush, number 49, outside linebacker, who is currently ahead of Jeff Holland. Yes, excellent game. Josie Jewell, Zaire Anderson, we're going to talk about them a little bit more specifically in the mailbag. We received some questions there, but I thought they both were standouts. Jamal Carter, before he got hurt, was playing very well. Kyle Pecco at the point of attack, doing great work. And then, of course, Zach Kerr. Now, Zach Kerr, you expect him to play well against 2s and 3s because he's a veteran. He's an experienced starter in this league. So, but hats off to those guys. As you mentioned earlier, though, Isaac Yiadom, he saw a lot of snaps with the first team in those first couple series and then stayed on the field. He was really just dealt a tough hand from a matchup perspective. Again, I don't think the coaches were spending a whole heck of a lot of time because of the lack of game plan, the nature of that, really choosing who's matching up with who. They're just kind of playing vanilla defense. Whoever lines up in your zone, that's who you're taking, whether you're actually in zone or if you're in man. So Isaac Yiadom, one thing that Coach Joseph said after the game was that, look, yeah, we would have liked him to have made a few more plays, but his coverage was actually good. He was in position, he just didn't finish. And I'll agree with him on that. I think that he was at least there. He wasn't getting burned badly in coverage by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a split-second reaction time that he needs to improve on, and that'll come with these live bullets and going against outside competition. But certainly a trial by fire for the rookie third-rounder. Zach Brennan Langley, to me, looks lost still. Yeah. Always late to react, always slow to the ball. I don't know. I know the Broncos were high on his athleticism and his raw potential, but I'm not seeing it there. And I
never liked the pick.
Yeah, it was just questionable. If you're going to draft that guy, it should have been in the late rounds.
It was definitely a reach in the third round. I've been saying that since he was drafted. Never liked that pick.
Mm-hmm. But last thing here I'll say, and I'll serve this over to you, is, aside from giving up that 85-yard screen to Rock Thomas, I thought the second-team defense mostly held their own against Trevor Siemian. It's not that they're that great of a unit. They're number 2. But there were some strong individual performance, I think, anyway, to take away from the 2, Zach, that is encouraging. We can talk more about that.
I was actually really impressed with the second string. I know, like you said, they're not going up against world beaters, but Siemian is a veteran quarterback, and he knows how to at least move the ball against second string defenses. And a lot of the players you mentioned were also standouts in my mind. I want to add a few more players, and that is Shelby Harris, defensive tackle now, defensive end. Yep. He had a couple nice run plays, and he's going to be another good player for them. Oh, yeah. And I saw that he might get an extension. It was put out there on Twitter today, so they should look to lock him up. Yep. And also Jeff Holland, the outside linebacker, undrafted free agent. He had a couple pressures. Yep. And this linebacking core, inside and outside, is stacked with veterans and young players. Up and down the depth chart, they just have depth, and they have pass rushers and pass, coverage specialists and run stuffers. I'm very impressed with the linebackers. Jewell had a nice game. Rush was one of the best players in the field to me yesterday. Mm-hmm. A lot of nice pressures. I hope they can find a place for him. Jamal Carter, like you said, he has that hamstring now. I hope that doesn't affect his roster status. But I was really, really impressed with the second string, and I saw a lot of positives they can bring out of that. They were definitely better than their offensive counterparts in the second team. So it's a lot of positives to bring out of that, and I was impressed.
We did receive a little bit of news from some sources about how Denver views the off-ball linebacker position right now coming out of that first preseason game. So I'll just say real quick for the VIP subscribers, go to the MHH Insiders Forum and you can see a little bit more what we're talking about there. And if you're not a VIP subscriber, you guys, come on. What are you waiting for? But I mean, overall, there were some really strong individual performances. But that Marcus Rush, I'll be honest, that was the first time I really have evaluated him in a live game scenario. And I loved his energy. He's got a great motor. I loved his ability to bring some, he's not the most explosive, quick twitch guy, obviously, but
he brought some heat off the edge.
Yeah, and it was pretty consistent. So got to be excited about that. And Josie Jewell, again, we'll get more into him in a little bit, but you saw a lot of the same traits and ability that made him such a special player in college.
And with Tal Davis out, it gave the inside linebackers a good addition. And Jewell and Zaire Anderson both, they were two of the best players in the game. So when they develop them and they get a little more tread, on their tires, they're going to be really good players, especially Jewell, who I'm very high on.
Absolutely. Now, mercifully, Chad Kelly finally entered the game with about 6 minutes left to go in the third quarter. And we've chronicled how bad the offense had been for the Broncos up to that point. Starters, you had 2 3-and-outs, and they were yanked. Lynch in the twos, I think it was, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 first down the entire time they were on the field. And were it not for Royce Freeman's brilliance, I mean, we'd be talking about a complete you-know-what show here. And then Kelly finally goes in, and wouldn't you know, it's a spark. And that alpha mentality, that energy comes onto the field. He starts moving the ball. Bill Musgrave calls a hurry up, gets him in a groove really quick, gets him in a rhythm. Broncos drive down and score. Goes 3 for 3, Kelly, on his opening drive passing. The next series, he drives the Broncos down again. Now, keep in mind, the Broncos were still trailing at this point, puts yet another touchdown on the board. It was a third down throw under pressure to Phillip Lindsay, who showed that burst himself, that speed to get to pay dirt. Broncos take the 1-point lead, and all of a sudden it looked like they were going to roar back, take control of this thing late in the game at home. Then Kyle Sloter, not wanting to be outshined by Chad Kelly, he drives Minnesota down for 6. They convert the 2-point. Now Denver trails by a touchdown, and the chips are really down now. This is where we're going to see what's what. 2 offensive plays later, Kelly throws that ill-advised pick, and the floodgates really opened from that point for the Vikings. Sloter drives down, great field position, of course, starting from the pick, scores again himself, stretching for the pylon, extends Minnesota's lead to 14 points. And then all Kelly really had left was about 3 minutes, drives down, and the Broncos get to the goal line but run out of time. So if you look at what Kelly did, he had 4 possessions from the time he entered the game with just under 6 minutes left to go in the third quarter. 3 of those 4 possessions, the Broncos drove at least 70 yards. And the only one that, of course, they didn't do that was on his interception. Now, all in, he went 14 of 21 for 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, and that interception. His rating was by far the best amongst the 3 quarterbacks on the Broncos roster at 104.7. So we'll get to some of the other third-teamers here in just a bit, but we really got to sink our teeth into the Chad Kelly situation because he was a sensation. I mean, we got to couch it in the fact that we understand he was playing against third-team competition. We get that. But when you really consider that it had been over 600 days, according to him, I think he said 664, since he last played in a real football game. I mean, that really puts things into perspective, and I think, for me anyway, helps me appreciate really what the achievement was. I mean, we're not going to crown him, obviously, but to see him go that long without playing football, Zach, come in and be that kind of a spark and be that productive, it was quite striking.
You talk about spark. You saw it in last week's scrimmage with the intra-squad scrimmage the Broncos had. The first and second team offense did absolutely nothing. In comes Chad Kelly. They found the end zone twice. He just brings a natural energy to the game. My second point about him, and I was extremely impressed by Chad Kelly, and his first live action in 2 years, that touchdown to Lindsay, where he stood in the pocket. He knew facing a pass rush he was going to get crushed, and he sidearmed a laser to Lindsay in stride. Lindsay did not break stride for 1 second, and he found his way to the end zone. That was just impressive on so many levels, and it shows you the kind of gunslinging mentality. It shows you the pure passing ability that Kelly has. And my third point about him is I don't care that they lost the game. And that pick, to me, it was a gunslinger making gunslinging errors. It's a guy who hasn't played in 2 years, and he tried to make a play there. It didn't happen. But I want a quarterback that takes chances. I don't want a quarterback throwing 3-yard slants on 3rd and 10. I want a guy who's going to move the ball, push it down the field. So he almost got in the end zone at the end of the game. The final score doesn't matter to me. There's nothing not to like about Kelly's performance. He had the stadium chanting his name. I mean, you're talking about a third-string quarterback coming into a preseason game, and the fans are going crazy. Whether that's because he has the pedigree of being Jim Kelly's nephew, or the Broncos fans are so desperate for a young quarterback to step up.
That's where it is.
Yeah, there's nothing not to like about Chad Kelly, and he deserves those second-team reps. I'll say it again.
No doubt.
I don't know why it doesn't happen yet, but I loved what I saw yesterday.
I'll say this, if he does not get second-team reps this week, the Broncos might be facing literally like a mutiny in the fan base.
They already are.
I mean, seriously, talk about that piece you published early on Sunday about Paxton Lynch with the GoFundMe.
Yeah, fans have taken their level of Paxton Lynch, the level of hatred, to such a level they started a GoFundMe fundraiser to cut Paxton Lynch. Where do you see that ever happening? And even if it doesn't get any donations, which it hasn't since the last time I checked that out, it just shows you that he is just so hated by this fan base. He's just so despised that they want him out of town. And for Vance not to give Kelly, and he said, we'll see last night, he has to watch the tape. What is there to watch? You were on the sideline. You saw it happen live in front of you. What is there to see?
We know what that means, though. I mean, that means I got to wait to see what John wants me to do. That's translation is, I think, here's the thing. I think in most coaching, decision-making, playing time, all that, in most situations, Vance Joseph is the final call. But when it comes to the quarterback situation, I honestly believe to give him give him a break a little bit. I think his hands have been tied a little bit. And one way you can tell is reading between the lines and what he's said over the last few weeks. Anytime he talks about Paxton Lynch, it's about how young he is and he just needs more experience and, he's been fine. He's completing the ball. I mean, talking about him like he's in kindergarten or something. And then when he talks about Chad Kelly, all of a sudden he lights up. He's a playmaker, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't always look pretty, but he finds a way, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, Zach, that just means that his hands are tied a little bit. There's some politics here that are a little bit outside his control.
I mean, I guess, but Elway is a Hall of Fame quarterback, and he's personal friends with Jim Kelly. Yeah, he should know. How do you not see that? It's just is baffling to me. I can't wrap my head around it.
Now, one quick tweet I want to bring up is from a fellow by the name of Rob Paul on Twitter. I don't think he has any official standing, so to speak. I don't know that, but our friend Nick Kendall, one of the hosts, of course, of Building the Broncos, he retweeted this, and so it caught my attention. But this Rob Paul, this was kind of a pessimistic, realist take on Chad Kelly from Saturday night. This fella said, takeaways from Chad Kelly's game last night. Numbers are better than tape, so his production was better than what his tape showed, according to this fella. Dead feet in the pocket, needs to be fixed. Trusts his arm a ton, maybe too much. Confident passer, not afraid to hit tight windows. Forces too many throws, and then 100% better than Paxton Lynch. And then lastly, not an NFL starter. So I responded to that on Twitter. I'll let if you guys are interested, you can go see exactly how I responded in the written word. But the one thing I'll say is, again, he might not be right this moment ready to step in and start. And so that brings up questions about what do you do on the backup front. We're going to talk about that in here in just a few minutes. But I don't think, speaking for myself, I didn't see anything last night from Chad Kelly that made me think he doesn't have the potential to be something in this league. And how that plays out, I don't know. There's still a long road left to hoe for him. I mean, he's got 3 more preseason games. The Broncos have some personnel decisions to make. They got to put their priorities in order there. But Chad Kelly, again, I remind you guys, hasn't played in a meaningful football game for 664 days. And he goes out and lights the stadium on fire. I mean, there's just some quarterbacks just have it, that moxie, that confidence, that alpha mentality. And not only that, as far as personal, individual confidence, but the ability to rally those around him. And their quarterbacks coach, the new guy, Mike Sullivan, he's been telling these guys, look, when you're in the huddle, you have to market yourself in the huddle. You got to sell yourself to your teammates. Why? Because they got to believe in you. That energy has to rub off on them so that they can execute and raise their level of play to the same that yours is at. And we saw that from Chad Kelly. And not only that, another veteran move, he was making protection calls, changing things at the line of scrimmage. And then after the game, he threw that pick, but he was having his name chanted by the entire stadium, Zach. He completely minimized, downplayed that like he couldn't have cared less about the fans chanting his name, and instead went out of his way multiple times to credit his offensive line and how good his receivers were. That's veteran stuff. I mean, that's leadership right there.
Humble but hostile, to quote Derek Wolfe. And about Chad Kelly, you don't need him to be a starter right now. And he's still developing, and no one says otherwise. He hasn't played in 2 years. It's his first NFL live action. He came in, threw 2 touchdowns, passer rating of 104. What more do you want to see? You can critique him, and you can, hem and haw over his perceived shortcomings, but you don't need him to be a starter. And he's already better than Paxton Lynch in his first game compared to a guy in his third year. And to your point about that it factor, you can't teach that. You can get the best coaching in the world. You can spend as much time as you want. You cannot teach the it factor, and Kelly has it. So as a third stringer who should be a second stringer, there is nothing not to like about what you saw last night.
And I think a lot of the negative or the shade that's getting thrown on Chad Kelly from last night, most of it, and I understand it. I mean, everybody's got an opinion, okay? But especially those who are in the analysis game when it comes to football, and especially guys who study the draft and spend so much time watching college film and stuff like that. But not necessarily just those guys, even, the average fan and everybody out there who had anything really, who came away from that experience last night saying, Chad Kelly, whatever. The reason for that is that a lot of them, they kind of staked they planted their flag in the ground however many months ago. Maybe it was last year during the draft, okay, saying, look, Chad Kelly doesn't deserve to be drafted. He's a mess. He's not a good quarterback, blah, blah, blah. He's never going to be anything in the NFL. And then time goes by. He kind of disappears. He's redshirting his rookie year as he's recovering from those 2 injuries that he had. And then he comes back and he explodes like that. All of a sudden, some people, it's hard sometimes to say you're wrong, or it's hard sometimes to give credit where it's due, especially if you have something on the line. And maybe it's just ego, whatever it might be. But there's nothing wrong with just saying, look, the kid exceeded expectations. Hats off to him. The Broncos might have something there. Now, whether or not it was good enough for the team to feel confident in him being possibly the backup to Case Keenum for the regular season, that's a topic we're going to get to here in a minute. But that remains to be seen. But give the kid some credit. That's all I'm saying.
It seems personal, and I agree with you that people don't want to admit that they were wrong about him, and they could say, oh, it's just one game, they can downplay it, but it seems personal, and it kind of reminds me of all the negative backlash that Baker Mayfield has got because he had such off-field problems, and he was this braggadocious guy with an attitude, and Chad Kelly has those same qualities, good and bad. So I just think some people consider him to be unlikable. Yep. On a personal level, and that maybe translates to their professional opinion of him. But I think it's, from what you've seen after one game in 2 years, you can't hate on it at all.
Yeah, you got to be encouraged, and that's really all there is to it. That's all there is to it. So Zach and I, look, we've made no secret about it over the last few months that both of us are probably more high on Chad Kelly than the average guys who cover this team. But so for us, there might be a little bit of confirmation bias involved with what we're saying here. We can recognize that, but still, I think even for the most objective viewer from last night, he exceeded expectations. So the Broncos might have something there long term. It remains to be seen. But we still have a lot to get to, especially with the mailbag flooded with questions this week. But really quick, we got to holler at you about why you need to become a Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports VIP subscriber, because our approach to covering your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, is not just about reporting the news. We pride ourselves on being able to relate to you all the breaking news on the Broncos as it's happening in real time, but we also really like to focus on breaking down the Broncos in depth, and especially now that we've got some real tape, some current tape to review. We're going to be doing all 22 film rooms. There's going to be X's and O's analysis, deep dive player evaluation on these guys, and we save our best and most in-depth content for our VIP subscribers, our premium members. You can become a Mile High Huddle VIP today and get access to 100% of our written analysis and our VIP insider forums, which I referenced earlier in the show, by clicking on the green banner at the top of the website. You click the monthly or the annual option, and you'll be locked in. From there, you get access to everything we produce, which includes any insider info we pick up along the way. Okay, so just remember, we work hard to bring you the best Broncos coverage and analysis on the web. We do ask for your support by becoming a VIP subscriber. So pull the trigger. You have our word. You will not be disappointed. All right, so we're running long here, Zach, so we'll mow through these mailbag questions because there's quite a lot of them this week, and deservedly so. Coming out of that game, a lot of topics on people's minds and the minds of Broncos country. So reminder, though, here, guys, as we peek inside the Mile High mailbag, Zach and I, we are your football priests. We're here to offer that absolution and those answers to your burning Broncos questions. And the first one comes from friend of the show, Mile High Huddle VIP, speaking of it, Jacob Smith. His question, coming out of game one of the preseason, how concerned should we be with the defensive performance 42 points given up in any game is a concern, Jacob writes. No Von Miller, obviously. That didn't help. But Minnesota had their way with the defense, especially on the ground. So, Zach, how concerned should we be with the defensive performance?
I mean, a little concerned. No Von Miller, no Todd Davis, no Tremaine Brock, no Sua Cravens. Those are pretty, especially Miller, his pretty fairly contributors to this defense. But it's not overly concerning. But I will say this, that defense is supposedly Joseph's specialty. And he brought him along, and he hasn't really shown much on defense with his coordinator, Joe Woods. I wasn't happy with the run defense. We said it earlier. That's definitely a concern. I don't know what happened there. A lot of missed tackles, a lot of bad assignments, bad technique. The pass defense, a little leaky, but I'm not willing to make any determinations on this defense. They're still very talented when they put it all together, and I want to see how they respond against a lesser competition in the Bears next week. Then I'll have a little more of a clear head on that, but I'm not overly concerned. It was a little depressing to watch at times with Kirk Cousins just marching them down the field. Yeah. But I'm not pressing the red button just yet.
Yeah, I mean, Jacob, I don't fault you if you are discouraged at this point from the defensive performance. But again, I want to remind you that in preseason games, they do not game plan. So they don't take time studying the opponent's film. They don't look for weaknesses in individual technique or performance. Okay, they're not really focused and concerned with matchups. And in that sense, they're not really trying to get the upper hand on the opponent in terms of pre-game scheme and strategy. Really what they're doing is Joe Woods is calling a defense through the headset. He says, here's the play we're going to run. Line up and just do the best you can with what's in front of you. Now, in that sphere, the Broncos failed. I mean, they just did not do well when just asked to line up and play football with no preconceived information and notions other than just general knowledge about the Minnesota Vikings. So that being said, again, to me, Zach, it goes back to the whole intensity thing. Were they prepared to play football? I don't know. I just don't think on an emotional level, from an energy, from a motor perspective, this team just wasn't quite up to task. And I think, though, getting it put on them like that, you'll see them bounce back in week 2. So second question here comes from Dion Hicks on Twitter, at Dion L. Hicks. Question, if we move on from Paxton, like I think we should, do we go into the season with Kelly as the backup, or should we turn to a veteran backup? Your answer for Dion, Zach.
Here's what I do. I cut or trade Paxton Lynch, bite the bullet. I promote Kelly to second string, and I sign a veteran quarterback like Matt Moore, who would be a steal right now as a third stringer. You have a veteran quarterback under center. You have a promising young quarterback as the backup, and you have an insurance policy as the third stringer. That's what I would do. Some people have suggested that they go into the season with just Keenum and Kelly. I don't like that. As much as I'm high on Kelly, you just can't risk Keenum getting hurt, and then it's Kelly, then no one else left. Then you have Marquette King being the quarterback in an emergency. So I would do that. I would dump Paxton. I would sign a veteran. I'd promote Chad Kelly. And that's I think, is a more well-rounded depth chart. And I think if you do that, it would really buy a lot of respect in the locker room. Because the Broncos players, and especially the defensive players, they're not stupid. They're perceptive of this. They know that Lynch is a albatross at this point.
Yep.
He's holding them back.
And weighing them down.
I think if they showed some accountability, especially from Joseph, who's a lame duck, it would really, galvanize the locker room a little bit. So that's what I would do.
Excellent point. And I can't disagree with what you said. Before last night, I had my doubts. I wrote a piece about why the Broncos shouldn't target Teddy Bridgewater. This was before, of course, the Jets played on Friday. But one of my four reasons of not going after Teddy Bridgewater is that, look, you said back in the spring you were confident and comfortable with either Chad Kelly or Paxton Lynch being the backup. What's changed? I don't think there's been enough empirical data that should really have been enough to change how you felt about the quarterback situation just a few months ago. And now, though, after one preseason game, you see how Paxton Lynch is simply not an option. So that devolves to Chad Kelly, and then there's nothing. So I've come around on that in that I do at least acknowledge, I'm with you on that they need to get a backup. Now, does that mean you go out and give up, a really good player or a mid-round pick to acquire a guy like Teddy Bridgewater? I'm not to that point. I'd love to have Teddy Bridgewater. Don't get me wrong. Okay, I have concerns about his knee, but I wouldn't want to take on that $6 million cap hit this year that he's going to come with. And I also wouldn't want to give up anything for him at this point because he's gone after this year. So he's only under contract for one single season. So I agree with you. Go find someone who's on the street today that you can get in here for the next few weeks and work behind Keenum and Kelly. Vault Kelly to the second team. I like that idea. And this guy's just your fail-safe. The veteran's just your fail-safe in case things really go sideways. If Keenum were to go down, heaven forbid, give Kelly a shot. And if Kelly doesn't prove to be up to snuff, so to speak, as the backup, he can't carry the water for a game or two or however long it would take for Keenum to return, you've got the veteran fail-safe. That's how I would approach it at this point. And maybe that's, to some people, maybe that's saying a lot about Chad Kelly. But he's the Broncos quarterback. He's the best Broncos quarterback on the roster, not named Case Keenum. So, and he deserves those second-team reps, Zach.
And the thing is with the Broncos, they did it a few years ago. They had Simeon and Lynch, and they had Austin Davis as that veteran third stringer. So they've already done it. And to your point about Bridgewater, I would like him, but I fully agree with you that I would not give up any compensation when they just need a placeholder. They just need insurance. And I don't fully trust a guy, even though he looked good, who had a devastating knee injury. I would sign Matt Moore, maybe Derek Anderson, just someone who can come in and learn the offense and give them sort of a fail-safe, like you said.
All right, so we move on to Amber. Her question is running back standings. Who stays, who goes? Then she also asked about the quarterbacks, which we already addressed. So the running back standings, we kind of got a pretty solid dose of everyone except Devontae Booker on Saturday night. And from what we saw from Devontae, it was kind of more of the same with him just not showing good vision, running into the backs of his blockers. Just, you know what, to me, he's just a third down fail-safe. That's what you want to talk about, a fail-safe. Devontae Booker is your third down fail-safe. You need someone to pass block, and you need someone to run a route out of the backfield. That's him. But clearly, Zach, the guy who emerged from the first preseason game as the leader in the clubhouse to become the starter week one has got to be Royce Freeman.
That's right. Yeah, he had that touchdown. And I've been saying this for a while, that I think Freeman is going to be the early down back, and then Booker will be the third down back. And then whatever carries are left over will go to Henderson and Lindsey or Williams. It's too small of a sample size to draw any conclusions from that, but Freeman by far was the best player on the field. He hit that edge really hard, and he's a rich man's version of C.J. Anderson. So very impressed with him, and I think he will be the starter sooner than later, but by title, I think Booker could be the starter going into week one. One player who didn't impress me, though, was David Williams. I didn't really see anything from him that stood out to me. Yep. And Phillip Lindsay showed a lot to me, both on specials and as a pass catcher. So I think his stock is going up. And Henderson didn't really do much either. So Freeman and Lindsay were the two standouts from that game in the backfield.
I'm probably a little more optimistic on how D'Angelo Henderson played on Saturday night. I liked what he saw. He didn't get as many opportunities to really flex his stuff, but I just like how patient he is and how he gets lost behind his big offensive lineman. And, they ran a couple of stretch plays where he found a way to squirt through. He took his time, waiting patiently to see what opened up on the backside and then knifed through. And that's just something we've never seen from Devontae Booker. You've never seen that kind of vision and patience and instinct as a runner. And I don't think, just like with Paxton Lynch, he's 3 years in. If you're not seeing it now, you're probably never going to see it. But I would say the way it stands now, the way you saw the depth chart unfold on Saturday night is probably the way it remains with at least going into week two with Booker. Well, maybe Freeman leapfrogs him. We'll see on that. But Booker, Freeman, Henderson, Lindsey fourth, and then David Williams, who, if it continues in the same vein, is certainly not making the roster and might not even get a practice squad spot. So next question, we go to Matthew Slagle, I believe is how it's pronounced on Twitter. M. Slagle, ONV on Twitter. Question, should we be a tad concerned with the first team offense? It went nowhere. Product of miscommunication and penalties? ? Your answer for Matthew.
A tad concerned, yes. Overly concerned, no.
Yeah.
It's a lot of new moving parts. Like we already talked about this at the beginning of the show. A lot of new moving parts. New quarterback. Didn't have his left guard. New wide receivers. New protection. It was very concerning in the sense they couldn't even get a first down, though. And they had a penalty on offense on the offensive line. So it's kind of like a deja vu flashback from last season. You would have liked to see at least, maybe not even point, just move the ball a little bit, show some rhythm. And they couldn't even go anywhere. But again, the whole Broncos team came out flat.
Yep.
They had no intensity, no energy. So, again, it falls on the coaching there. I wouldn't say it was penalties. I wouldn't say it was miscommunication. I would just say it's a lot of new moving parts and a lack of preparedness and just some rust there. They will get going. I was not expecting to see, the 07 Patriots off the bat.
Sure. Well, and it's not as an excuse, but we have to also view it through the prism of the fact that they're going against arguably the best defense in the NFL.
Great point.
Now, you look at that, just like the Broncos, they probably didn't game plan, but they did have the one advantage of having practiced against Case Keenum all of last season. And so, that skews it a little bit, but to be just direct and blunt with you, I wouldn't be concerned. Your verbiage was probably the best. Tad concerned, maybe. Overly concerned about the first-team offense. Absolutely not. But my message to Vance Joseph is give Case Keenum a little bit more time on the field in Game 2. So we move on to Zeb on Twitter, @Zeb211. Can you break down some of the rookie linebacker play? It was tough for me to follow them as I haven't learned their numbers quick enough to know. Let me take this one because I saw this tweet early on in the day, and then upon my second viewing of the game, I paid a lot more attention specifically to Josie Jewell and later on Keyshawn Bierria. But I'll say this, Josie Jewell, most of his plays were really good, where you saw his excellent instinct in that motor and his direct path to the ball. He's not a player. Cecil Lammey talks about this a lot, and I heard him say it a long time ago. And when I watch film of Josie Jewell, I kind of look at it this way now, which is he doesn't waste a lot of time, a lot of missteps before taking his angle to the ball. And his angles, more often than not, are the correct angles. Now, his first game as a Bronco, as a pro, it was not perfect by any stretch. But as a run defender, he was on. In pass coverage, I would say he was about 50-50. In actual open routes where he was covering a tight end or a back out of the backfield in an actual route, I would say he was good. But that 85-yard touchdown from Rock Thomas, if you go back and watch that, Josie Jewell, who had done a good job not getting washed out by offensive linemen up to this point, just got mauled by one of the Vikings guys and just pushed to the outside, which created his instinct was right. He flowed to the right point of the field where the ball was going. He saw it unfold, so his instinct and his recognition was right, but he just either took the wrong angle or was not quick enough to react once he engaged. He wasn't able to stack and shed, so to speak, to get off of that lineman and make the tackle. And then as far as Keyshawn Bierria, but still, with Jewell, much more encouraging than discouraging. It was a great first game, but for him, too, he's shaken off a lot of rust because he started off pretty much inactive the first few days of training camp, so he's still building that momentum. And then Keyshawn Bierria, I'll say this, he looked a little bit more out of his element. He's a guy doing cleanup duty on third team. But there were a couple plays. I do like his instinct. I like his intensity. I think long-term, not this year, long-term I think he could have the type of third down coverage linebacker impact that Corey Nelson eventually had with the Broncos. But right now, Zach, I don't think we can really expect Keyshawn Bierria to make this team.
No, you hit the nail on the head with the inside backers. Jewell, a lot more positives than negatives, and the Broncos drafted him for his pass covering ability, and you saw some of it on display last night. He also put his nose in the hole and made a couple stops there. I was impressed with him, and like you said, he was injured and he kind of fell behind the eight ball, but once he gets going and he gets some seasoning to him, he's going to be a really good player. And he's already drawn praise from his coaches, from his teammates like Von Miller. So you nailed it on the inside linebackers. Bierria, another pick I wasn't thrilled about. I feel like they could have gone elsewhere with that because they already drafted Jewell. Right. But it was more encouraging than discouraging. But I want to talk about the outside linebackers. And we already touched on this, but Jeff Holland, Marcus Rush, two really, really impressive performances, especially Holland, who has sneaky bend off the edge. Yep. Is he Von Miller? No, but this was a guy who was kind of a sack master at Auburn. He had a mid-round grade, and the Broncos signed him as an undrafted free agent. And in a very, very stacked outside linebacking core, I would go so far as to say last night that he looked better than Shaq Barrett. Mm-hmm. He had more production and he put more on tape than him. So in terms of the rookie linebackers, you nailed it with the inside backers, but outside, Rush and Holland really, really impressed me. And I hope they can keep 5 on the roster because Holland deserves a spot in the 53.
Yep, just remains to be seen what kind of a real opportunity Marcus Rush has. If he can parlay the next 3 games, I should say if he can parlay this last performance in game 1 into the next 3 games, the Broncos will have a hard time choosing between him and Jeff Holland. Of course, that would be if Jeff Holland also continues to play well. So, yeah, I think the youth the Broncos have, if they're worried at all, it's just the fact that they're so young and inexperienced in many ways as far as their depth. But you got to like what you saw so far from those both the outside backers and the off-ball linebackers. But they got 3 more games to work out some of those kinks and really show what they're worth. All right, last question here. Chef M, we've touched on this already, but Chef's a great friend of the show and a solid reader at Mile High Huddle. His question, 42 points on my mind. What do you make of Joe Woods? There's another thing. Should we be worried about Joe Woods now?
I mean, he ended that sentence with an ellipsis, and I'll say that to finish that sentence is I don't know about him yet. I feel like him and Vance Joseph, their background is defensive, the secondary, and they got picked apart last year a little bit, and you saw it last night, so they're not really playing up to snuff. And I'm not going to lie, and I think most fans would agree that they replaced Wade Phillips with Joe Woods, and that was a major, major downgrade there. Yep. So you know how you say Joseph is a puppet of Elway? I think Woods is a puppet of Vance Joseph. And he's kind of just that figurehead. And I haven't really seen much that impresses me. His blitz packages aren't that creative. The secondary struggled last night. The run defense was leaky. I'm not going to jump to conclusions or overreact, but he needs to show a little more that he could be a coordinator at this level in charge of and responsible for a very, very talented defense that boasts Hall of Fame players and All-Pro players.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing for Joe Woods, and I talked about this a lot last year, you've even heard Joe Woods himself, talk about this in several of his remarks this offseason, but there's a big difference from jumping from being a secondary coach where you're mostly teaching. I mean, you're contributing to the scheme, you're contributing to the game plan, but you're mostly leading and teaching and coaching. There's a big difference from being there and jumping to scheme and play caller. Game plan, scheme, play calling. And there's an instinct that kicks in, and one of the reasons Wade Phillips is as great as he is nobody is, with the exception of maybe Bill Belichick, but nobody as defensive coordinator in this league is as instinctual and just knows the right call the play to call in the right moment as Wade Phillips. And so you got a guy like Joe Woods. He's a young coach. He's very inexperienced as a play caller. Last year was his first and only year as a defensive coordinator. And again, that's where you're seeing him have to make up a lot of ground. His players love him. I know that. So I don't think he has a problem rallying the troops. I think he has the love and respect of his room. But can he cut the mustard on game day in terms of calling the right plays in the right moments? Yesterday, I mean, jury's still out. You can't really take yesterday in terms of answering that question. You can't use it as a piece to the puzzle because he didn't even game plan. He was just going against, here's what personnel they have on the field. All right, here's my call. He wasn't really pushing the envelope, so to speak. So for me, Joe Woods, the jury's still out. He still gets a pass.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The jury is still out on him, and he's only been the coordinator for going on his second season, but his fate is tied to Vance now. If Vance gets fired, he's not going to be brought back, and he was kind of lucky to be retained last year when they replaced their offensive coordinator, replaced their special teams coordinator. The only mainstay was Woods, and again, I think he's a figurehead for Joseph, who has a big hand in the defense also. So this one game, I'm not going to determine his fate, and I'm not going to jump to any conclusions, but I want to see what happens in the regular season. They got to shore up the secondary. They got to fix the run defense from last night. They can't have those extend into the regular season. So we'll see what happens with them.
So at a team level, it wasn't good last night. Obviously, you lose 42-28, even in the preseason, the opener at home. It's not good. No one wants to lose at home in your opening game, whether it's preseason or not. But on an individual level, there are many positives to take away. And I think for now, Broncos country, that's what you got to hang your hat on. And just try not to get caught up in the knee-jerk on the big picture stuff. But for now, hey, listen, we're going to come back at you here soon. You know we will. We'll be serving up the gut reaction episode after the Bears game. But that's all the time we got for today. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter, @Kelberman247, and myself, @Chad and Jensen. Make sure you're subscribing, you guys, no matter where you're listening to the show, because this season is going to be a doozy. For Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.